My name is Marvin Pena, and I'm a COVID-19 survivor. I'm going to be answering a few questions and telling my story about COVID-19. So I grew up in Chelsea, and I got to this country when I was 8 years old. We immigrated from El Salvador, and we I graduated in 2003, joined the military shortly afterwards. I deployed to Iraq in 2007, my first deployment with 1st Cav. I was a tank gunner, and then I went back to Iraq in 2009, my last tour. Well, initially, as soon as I found out, because my cousin lives with my parents, and I went to visit my parents, and about a few days later, I found out that my cousin's coworker had COVID. So what I did was I took it serious enough where I started quarantining myself, and I told myself, let me figure out if I have any of the symptoms, then I'm gonna go get myself tested. And then I got tested. I went to the VA. Didn't have enough tests yet because that was back in March when, again, this was unknown. We didn't have the test, so I couldn't get tested at the time. The VA sent me home and they told me, if you get worse, come back. I came back and I was way worse. And by finding, and then they took it so serious that they didn't even let me in the hospital. Everything was done in a tent, and I went into the tent, and they swabbed me outside of the tent. They put me in the tent there afterwards, and they sent me home again. And they actually slipped my release paperwork underneath the door, and they sent me my way home. And a few days later, I found out that I had COVID. When I got the test results, I knew that I had COVID already prior to that, just because of the symptoms that I had. Um, I'm like the poster child of, in terms of how sick can you get. I got, initially I started getting temperatures, the chills, the headaches. And then I was like, oh, at least I'm not, at least I can still taste and smell my food. 2 days later, I lost the ability to taste and smell the food and my appetite. And then I started getting my temperatures where it was 103, 104, and the Tylenol was not working. Nothing was bringing down my temperature. And everybody was telling me ibuprofen is no good, so I couldn't take ibuprofen. I couldn't take a lot of the stuff that would help me reduce my fever. It was my wife, myself, my mother, and my brother who had immediate contact with each other with my cousin. So we all ended up getting sick. And once everybody had different severities of being sick, I was the worst. Being, 35 years old, well, I'm going to be 35 in a few weeks, being 35 years old, being in decent health. And I didn't think, that I was going to get to that degree where I needed to be hospitalized. The moment that I walked from the kitchen to the living room, and I immediately felt like I just walked, 25 hours. I was completely out of breath, and I needed to take a nap after walking from the kitchen to the living room. That's when I realized something was wrong. Well, I already knew something was wrong, but I knew that I needed to get professional help from somewhere else other than the avenues I was already exploring. When I was about 3 weeks after I finding out that I had COVID, I started getting worse. Again, the worst of the issues was the respiratory problems and the temperature that would not go down. Once you get to a certain temperature, they're saying you get brain damage eventually. So my temperature would not go down from 104. I went to MGH at the end of March, and as soon as I got out from the car and I was walking, if I don't know if you're familiar with MGH, but you got to walk up a little bit, a little hill, and they can't drop you off anymore right in front of the door. At least during that time, you have to walk up. Those are the hardest steps that one can take when someone has this condition. And as soon as I had to take a few breaks going up the stairs, walking about, let's say, 40 feet, and I had to take a few breaks, this one attendant saw me and brought over a wheelchair to me. They told me that I had 104 temperature and that I was only getting 75% of oxygen into my body. and they admitted me immediately. They took me from the emergency room where they put oxygen in me. They put oxygen just through my nose, and then they took me to the ICU. I spent 5 weeks in the ICU, and after spending 5 weeks in the ICU, 23 of those days were in a coma where I was on in a ventilator. It got to the degree where I lost 50 pounds. I had muscle atrophy because I was 5 weeks without getting up. In those 23 days in a coma, I was connected to a ventilator, and I was completely out. And a lot of the stuff that I would hear, that what I was going through is after the fact, because my brother told me the process of how good or bad I was doing. Towards the end, well, during the middle of my stay in the hospital, they told me that while I was in a coma, I ended up getting pneumonia while I was already under. So they gave me antibiotics to surpass the pneumonia. And then afterwards, I got a lung infection during this whole process. And that was about, the last 3 days in a coma. And they were shooting me up with so many antibiotics. I was under so much medication that I didn't even know which world I was in. And I ended up waking up on the no correction, on the 19th day. They tried to wake me up. They took me off the medications, the sleeping medications, and everything else to keep me in a coma. And they told me that I had a coughing episode, and this coughing episode made me throw up, and I was about to choke on my own vomit. So they had to put me back under. They called my family member who was in charge, who was my brother, and they told him that on the 23rd day they were gonna take me out regardless of how I responded. And they told me if I didn't respond well, that they were gonna do a tracheotomy. So luckily, by the grace of God and whoever else was praying for me, there's a lot of family members and a lot of people that didn't even know me. When I woke up, I didn't have any I didn't have any worse reactions like I did when they tried to wake me up on the first time around. Well, initially, after waking up from the coma, I couldn't remember a lot of things in my life. I lost a lot of memory initially. Um, I've been married for about a year. I forgot who my wife was. And I spoke to a lot of people in the hospital, and they put a poster up. I think this is one of the best things about MGH, that they have people that actually care. And they had my brother send pictures um, of my family and everyone, and I didn't recognize who my wife was. I couldn't remember. They would ask me, "Who's this? Who's this?" Everybody in the picture, and I couldn't recognize my wife. After a few weeks after waking up from the coma, I started getting a lot of stuff back, but there's still a lot of things that I don't remember prior to Corona. It's not like I lost, chunks of memory, but there's a lot of stuff that I can't remember. My ability to run more, where even though I'm a bit of a big boy, I still run. I'm actually supposed to do the Boston Marathon with the ruck on September. So, but it's gonna take me a lot longer than I normally have done Boston Marathon, because my ability, my to regain my vascular capacity is not the same as it was before. Like I said, my leg is still very numb, and it's still very sore in other places. I'm a small business owner, and again, my company's name is Calvary Flooring, and I have 9 full-time employees, and then I also have about 4 part-time employees. And when this whole thing happened, when I was in the hospital, even a little bit prior to that, because I couldn't go out there myself and do estimates, I couldn't go out there and spend my time doing everything I needed to do to keep my business going. We literally shut our business down for, let's see, about 2 months. I also had to shut down my store. I had a store in Gloucester, and that store, it was my showroom. It was one of the things that I wanted to do ever since I went into business, and it was, I sold wood. I sold different things that had to do everything with construction, high-end flooring, and all those sorts of things. And because of COVID, the fact that I had to keep that overhead, the fact that I had to keep my employee there, well, we had to shut down, and all those things made me lose that store. But I kept my business as it was before the store, where we ended up, where we still can do installations of flooring, refinishing, and I could still provide the same services that I did pre-COVID. But we had this huge impact financially where the bills don't stop, the payments don't stop. And when I first got back, I did need to make a few phone calls because my financials were, everything was coming out, but nothing was coming in. So I had to reach out to, let's say, my mortgage company to get that 3 months relief where I didn't have to pay mortgage for 3 months because now I wasn't in recovery mode. I was in catch up mode. I had to catch up to everything because I was so far behind in terms of payments. Even, like I said, even as a small business owner with 3 vehicles, with overhead of a store, all the employees that I have, all that affected me where I had to slowly catch up. I've been out of the hospital for 3 months and I literally just caught up after 3 months, and literally working 6 or 7 days, sometimes 80 hours a week in order to catch up. I First month I couldn't walk. I didn't have the ability to walk. I was in a cane. I was in a walker. I had muscle atrophy. To this day, I still can't feel the right thigh. There's parts of my thigh where it's sore, and there's parts of it where numb. I have no feeling in my thigh. So all that affected me going out to look for work. All that affected me making a living to to feed my family, to support my family. But one of my biggest concerns were my employees, because not only am I looking out for myself, the way I see it is I'm looking out for 9 families because they have their family to feed. I think it's funny that today when we're doing this filming, I was waiting on my truck because I had an appointment in this place where I had to do an estimate today. And I just thought it was the funniest thing in the world because I saw one person walk towards the door and then what assumingly he said a few curse words and walked back to his car. And he knew what was happening because he was going to get his mask. And I rolled down my window and I'm like, "You forget your mask, huh?" He tells me, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, I just can't believe this because it's stupid cold." As soon as he said it's stupid cold, it made me realize that I need to talk to this guy. So I'm like, yeah, I understand your frustration. However, I was in the hospital in the ICU for 5 weeks. I spent about 20 minutes talking to him. I didn't know he was an older gentleman walking into the store I was gonna go into, and I spent 20 minutes. He was a Marine, cool guy, but just didn't realize how serious it was because in certain areas, depending where you live in, you just don't come in contact with a lot of people. You just don't know. You just hear stuff from, let's say, the media, social network, and if you're not exposed to somebody who's been directly affected by this, by this virus, you're not gonna take it as serious as someone who has been either sick or has lost someone. During my stay in the hospital, when I was in a coma, I found out my best friend's father was in the same hospital and just on the floor below. He spent a week in a coma and then died. And that, not only did I have to deal with my mother being sick, my brother being sick, my wife being sick, and myself in the hospital, but as soon as I got back, I found out he died. So that to me telling someone that story, telling that gentleman that story, his whole mood changed from him saying it's stupid cold, that he just wasn't aware of what was happening. Me educating him about that, I think changed his mind. He immediately he's like, "Well, let me put this mask on," and then I told him, I was like, you can take it as serious as you would like, or as not serious as you would like. The only difference is if one day you ended up catching it because you didn't take it serious, then that's when you realize you should have done that from the start. We can all get tired of it. Trust me, myself. I've been in as far back as me remembering waking up from the coma, me getting out of the hospital, which one of the biggest traumatic experiences that I had, even after coming back from war, getting out of the hospital, literally crying in the car with my brother, my mother, and my wife, all driving home. That moment when you try to teach somebody, and in reality, in a way, you try to save somebody's life because they may not be as lucky as I was. And the way I see it is, I live another day to help somebody out, to give them my story, to tell them, okay, it's not just a cold. It's not just you get sick for a few days. It's very severe. I was lucky. There's people dying every day. There's people who are losing so much financially, are losing so much in terms of family members, brothers, sisters, or friends. So the people who don't take it serious, I believe the moment that they're affected directly, that's gonna change their mind. And if I reach at least one person by me taking time out of my day and coming to speak with you guys, and at least I change one person's mind to take it a little bit more serious, put a mask on, to get clean their hands when they get home, then I mean it's just worth any time that it will take for me out of my day to talk to somebody.